And I know your resume is quite extensive, and I'll detail it even more when we go live. But we'll taste through the different wines, and I'm going to show the Shibumi Knoll Chardonnay, and we're going to show the Senses Pinot because someone came and bought all my Shibumi Knoll Pinot that I was going to show.
Okay. That's not a bad
That's not a bad thing. Um,
thing.
we'll do the Tirio, Bodega Tirio, which is remarkable.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's the first vintage from that vineyard, which is makes it even that much more incredible. I mean, that is literally I wouldn't call it a first crop wine, but pretty close. We did harvest a little bit in 2020. We had to destroy it, of course. So 21 is the first real commercial crop from that vineyard.
Wow, even more. Um, I just tasted the wine going into jars, and it's so complex. You said it's like first fruit.
I think it's fourth leaf technically. So it's the first real commercial crop. But I mean, part of what it is, and we can get deeper into this, but the area is incredible. And when we looked to plant that vineyard, Max and Lexi Terriot own it, and they came to me and said, "Hey, we've got some acreage. Maybe we can have some fun with it." And we looked at a bunch of different clones, and we're like, you know what, Clara is the best thing on this hill. So why were we going to plant anything else? Because every year we would make this other block of whatever clone and declassify it. So we did all 8 acres to Clara, and I think the combination of that area and that clone is just magical.
Thomas, how did you get into wine?
So I grew up in South Carolina. The family, not big wine drinkers, not wine drinkers at all, as a matter of fact. Not definitely drinkers, not wine drinkers. And then I ended up at the University of Virginia. I had a girlfriend there whose dad was a wine drinker, and her stepfather as well was a definite drinker, had a place in Provence with a pretty cool cellar, a
Hmm.
place that's been in his family for a little bit of time, I think. So it was kind of on both sides of her family. And there was wine on the table most every night. And every time I'd go over there for dinner, I'm like, I don't understand what this is. I don't understand why it tastes like this. This is amazing. I dated her just long enough where they had to start giving me Christmas gifts. So they started giving me books on wine. And, if you showed interest in something, people are always willing to open it, wine out to dinner. And I was just like, this is crazy. And then this same girlfriend won the Rhodes Scholarship. And that coincided with her being the keynote speaker at a UVA capital campaign event. And I was there as her guest. And I'm sitting next to this woman who's organized the event and provided the wine and all the stuff. And she's like, "What are you still doing in Virginia? You need to get to Napa like immediately." So the next week, packed up my car and drove myself across country to Oakland and started crashing with some friends. I slept in a friend's closet for 3 months for $50 a month. So you can't beat the rate. Full share of utilities, but reduced rent. And then just came up to Napa and knocked on a bunch of doors and ended up with 7 part-time jobs, and just finally kind of found my footing when I made it to Turley in '97, and All Seasons Wine Shop in Calistoga just before that. So those were the two foundations for me for really getting into wine.
Amazing. That's a journey.
And while it was happening, it felt like it took forever, of course, because I'm like 23, 24, 25 years old. I look back at it now and I'm like, these early winemaking jobs, all this other stuff, these people were crazy to give me these jobs. I was so not ready.
Yeah.
Um, but it worked out.
And so Turley, that would have been who was the head winemaker at Turley at that time?
So it was Aaron Jordan. Helen had come and gone. And when I was hired there, it was Aaron, myself, and one cellar guy. And he left pretty soon thereafter. For the longest time, it was a kind of a guy in the front of the house, a guy named Bob Nicolason, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but Bob, Aaron, and myself. And then Larry was kind of semi-retired from being an ER doctor. So he was out there a bunch. And that was kind of it. When I started in December of '97, it was a really small crew.
Incredible. And now you are the winemaker or consulting winemaker for how many projects do you have in your helm at this time?
I think it's now high 30s.
Unbelievable. That's crazy great.
Yeah.
And do you have any? I mean, some of them are teeny, and tonight we're going to taste two projects like Shibumi Knolls. Is that the smallest producer that you?
Not quite, but it's on the way small side. And that the basis of that project is the wine that you're tasting tonight, that Buena Tierra Chardonnay. Got to know Don Ross, who also is no longer with us. Just as wine drinkers, Don had an amazing cellar, and he was one of the most generous people I've ever run into. So we would get together with a group. There was a bunch of other people in that group that were winemakers, wine lovers, and Don and I began our relationship as friends. And then eventually was like, I don't understand why I'm not having you make my wines. We have similar palates. We have a passion for white Burgundy. All these other things kind of fell into place. And then jumped in with Shibumi, 12 years ago or something like that.
Hmm.
And what intrigued me about that project is this block that you'll taste in this bottle was planted in 1972. So it's one of the older parcels still out on in kind of that Russian River area. We think it's Old Vine Wente, but we're not 100% sure. But the vine age is really what unlocks the specialness in that wine. I mean, for Chardonnay and Pinot, I think it's hard to replace the impact vine age has on a wine.
And that is a really unique Chardonnay. Is there anything that you do like special or don't do special just to keep that uniqueness?
Well, so if you and I went and walked this block, you might be a little abhorred by the condition of some of the vines in the block. So really unlocking the goodness of the wine is farming that vineyard literally vine by vine.
Let's see.
And I think when Clay jumps on, and I know his background a little bit, when you talk about these old vine vineyards, you're not farming a vineyard or a vineyard parcel. You're farming every single vine individually. Some of these vines can support four clusters because they're maybe not in the best shape. They may be getting towards the end of their life cycle. There might be some virus pressure, things like that. And then other vines, they look like they were planted yesterday in terms of their health and vigor, and they support a full crop. And then there's other vines. We have to make the unfortunate decision. Last year was going to be the last year for that vine. So if you went out there, everything's from the same, era, same year. It was all planted in 72, but
Mhm.
you have what looks to be very distinct phases in kind of a vine's life cycle. And so when you're out there pruning, thinning, and the final veraison pass, mildew pass, things like that, you're literally farming that vineyard vine by vine, and that's the only way to get the goodness out of it.
Chardonnay has had its ups and downs. It was, and may still be the largest consumed white wine sold in America, but it certainly was punished a little bit with so many other grape varieties being brought into the American market and the expansion of Sauvignon Blanc and Albarino and Pinot Grigio and all these other products. But it appears that Chardonnay is really hit another gear. And I think you make a couple of them that are responsible for that. Um, is what do you think for the future of Chardonnay in California or the world? What do you think is next for Chardonnay?
Well, I think people are, it's kind of a little bit of the life cycle of the drinker too. You start with something that's a little more accessible, something easier to understand, something that might be rounder, less acidic, maybe even slightly not sugar sweet, but have a more fruity kind of character to it. And then as you kind of evolve, you move towards these wines that are more citrus fruit inflected and higher acids and, more perfumey, longer lived wines. And I think we saw a little bit of that on the Sonoma Coast early on. I remember tasting in the late 90s with James Lobby and some friends, and we're like, oh, the Sonoma Coast, so many exciting things happening out there. We pulled together as many far west Sonoma Coast wines as we could. And for the most part, the wines were not that interesting. And what we realized was the vines were 5 years old. The quality farming wasn't out that way because it was just really hard to get out there, hard to get people out there. And then all of a sudden, 20 years after that, you wake up to the idea that now these vineyards are 25 years old, 30 years old. The world out there feels smaller. Like I know from here to that vineyard is the same mileage as it was 20 years ago, but everything just feels closer.
Hmm.
So you're getting a lot more resources in these sort of far-flung areas. And I mentioned this in one of the Rivers Marie mailers one time. If my kids were to take this project over, I'm genuinely upset that they're going to be working with like 50 to 70 to 80-year-old vines. It's going to be not this special old vine selection. It's just going to be what things are. And I think the vine age out there for Chardonnay is really pushing quality. And we're in all kind of a very insular world, but we're seeing a lot greater appreciation for these citrus fruited, higher acid wines, racier, great reflections of the varietal, great reflections of the site, things that can compete with white Burgundy. I mean, I think, when you look at Napa chased Bordeaux for a while, kind of caught up to it, and people thought of those wines as on equal footing. I don't know that we're there for Burgundy yet, but when you see these, $400 Premier Cru White Bergs, and you've got this amazing West Sonoma Coast Chardonnay for $70, I mean, it's a pretty compelling story. And I
100%.
think there's a lot of appreciators out there, especially as people get shut out of other markets. You're seeing a more refined consumer come to California looking for high-end Chardonnay.
The irony is that I'm talking to Thomas Rivers Brown, one of the great Cabernet producers in the world, and we're not tasting one of your Cabernets tonight, but we're tasting a great Chardonnay from Shibumi Knoll, which is a darling brand, and we're tasting a great Pinot from an up-and-coming producer called Senses, and I think they're just top of the game wines. Um, and you make a lot of great Pinot Noir. You have your own Pinot Noir brand. Is there a grape variety that you prefer to work with, or is it because you're able to work with everything that it's inspiring to you?
I think there's sites that get me really excited. And right now, a lot of those sites tend to be on the Sonoma coast, and they tend to be more Pinot because, again, these are vineyards that are coming into their own from an age standpoint. Like Rivers Marie's flagship wine, the Sumo Old Vines bottling, that block will be 50 years old pretty soon.
Hmm.
There's just something really unique about that wine. It doesn't taste like anything else. And as someone who makes a lot of wine and drinks a lot of wine, that's kind of what you're looking for. Like on the cab side, you have like the Outpost True Vineyard on the top of Owl Mountain, or the Maybach Materium. When we put those wines in lineups, I can tell by the nose what those wines are. And for me, that's what is so exciting. I do think the general excitement on the West Sonoma coast right now kind of outstrips everything else.
Hmm.
The quality is just crazy. And I know people are getting tired of hearing me talk about it, but it is just shocking how good the wines coming out of there are. Like the 23 vintage, which will be kind of the next current release year, the wines are just awesome. I mean, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around what's coming out of there. And there's just a lot of joy out of there. And I think right now with the wine world being a little up and down and drinking preferences changing and all this other stuff, anywhere where we can go to find wines that are just kind of packed with joy is something that I think resonates with everybody.
What do you think in this my final question? What do you think is really, if you were to project out a couple of years, what do you think is going to be the next thing we're talking about, or the next big thing that's exciting you, and where wine is going?
I mean, for all these projects that I have, I'm Napa and Sonoma based. I really don't do anything else outside of those. I think we're going to see some generational changes, which always kind of reinvigorates the market. We're going to see some kids coming back home and taking over family wineries, and people right now, it's tough in the market. It's tough to sell wine direct. It's tough to sell wine 3-tier. But I think with this severe contraction that's happening in the wine market right now, it's going to make things more affordable. And I
Hmm.
feel like whenever the cost of entry goes down, you get a bunch of new players. There's a lot of opportunities that present themselves. There's this idea in Napa, like we own a winery in Calistoga for Rivers Marie. The idea of owning a winery in Napa Valley when things are going crazy, it seems like impossible. It should only be corporations and billionaires. But then you have these contractions, you have prices get cut in half, and all of a sudden you see a flood of new people come in. So I think we're about to see a generational change as some people age out. And I think we're about to see a whole nother whomever, I don't even know, I don't even have a guess as to who it's going to be, a whole nother sector of the population come into Napa and Sonoma and start investing in some of these great vineyard pieces, picking up wineries, for a lot less money than what they were valued a few years ago. So I think you're just going to see a lot of new blood in general. And I think that's what it's going to take to kind of reinvigorate Napa and Sonoma.
That's great insight. Thomas, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, we could go on for hours, but you got 39 wineries to go there.
Oh, yeah, I've got some hand holding to do for sure.
Wonderful to talk with you this morning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Bye.